What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast, where we'll talk about Trevor Penning's year two outlook, Mark Ingram's future, whether or not he's retiring as the Saints' all-time leading rusher, and Derek Carr's Pro Football Focus ranking. And honestly, I think it's a fair assessment of where he stacks up among quarterbacks in the NFL. And we'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. But before we do, I want to remind you that this program is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. That's right, a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Now, let's get into the start of the show. And we'll start off with a little bit of an appetizer in my mind, and that's the Mark Ingram news. And Mark Ingram, it was reported on Thursday night by the New York Post that he could replace Reggie Bush on Big Noon Kickoff for Fox Sports, which means he'd give you college football coverage. And my immediate thought was, I think it's kind of, I don't want to say funny, but ironic that Mark Ingram's about to take that spot on Big Noon Kickoff because, like I said, that means he'd be replacing Reggie Bush. And if we go back to 2011, what happened there? Saints drafted Mark Ingram. Reggie Bush wants out. He gets out, gets traded to Miami. It's just odd how things work, how he's about to do that. But in all, I don't want to say all seriousness, but just looking at the move itself, Mark Ingram going to broadcasting, if this is what he ends up doing, I look at it two ways. One, I think it's a good idea for him, especially the college route. I think Mark Ingram, he always brings that energy, and I'd imagine if he goes to a college football-based show, they'll do some stuff with him talking about Alabama and hyping them up, and I think he'll bring that. Plus, again, you're talking about a guy who is a former Heisman winner, a guy that's done an awful lot, both at the collegiate and pro level. It's not like you're going to lose Reggie Bush's experience and not bring anything in. I think Mark Ingram would do a fine job. And then you look at it from the other side, right? The perspective of understanding that, all right, Mark Ingram's career is actually over in terms of his playing career. And I think for Mark, we have to remember it wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always easy. But he is the all-time leading rusher for the Saints. He's got the most rushing touchdowns in Saints history. He had a very good career. And when I look back at Mark Ingram, I'm going to remember him for two things. I'm going to remember him for getting through the early bumps and bruises to becoming an all-time leading rusher for the franchise. I'm also going to remember his leadership. And I think for Mark Ingram, starting off with the first thing, if this is the end and he is retiring, and it kind of seems like that's what's going to happen, Mark Ingram did not produce at a high level early in his career. It took Mark Ingram a lot of time to really develop into the running back that we all know and love that he was. But early on, no, you were expecting stuff from Pierre Thomas. You were expecting stuff from Darren Sproles. You really weren't expecting it from Mark Ingram. Hell, I'd say Chris Ivory even had more moments, you would think, in the early 2010s than Mark Ingram. And then he started to come into his own. And then you remember kind of the second phase of what he did with the Saints. I mean, 2017 and 2018 were some of the most fun years I've ever had watching the Saints. And a lot of it was because of the backfield. And a big part of that also was Ingram and Kamara would give you hell on the football field, and then they'd give you laughs off of it during their interviews. So I just think that for him, it would be it makes sense for him to retire. I don't really think he's got a lot of gas left in the tank anyway. But as you guys mentioned, and it actually does bring up a good point, if he does retire, he kind of ends his career on a stinker, which is the thought of him kind of running out of bounds, injured against Tampa Bay. And again, I'm not going to blame a guy who's injured for doing what he does, but that kind of set the tone for the comeback that happened there, which absolutely stinks. But Mark Ingram, I don't have a cap on. If I did, I would tip it to you. It seems like he's going to retire. He had one hell of a career, and I'm excited to see what he does if he goes to broadcasting. I've often said that him, and particularly Cam Jordan, the world is theirs when they retire as far as what they want to try, because they do have really good energy. They've been nothing but stand-up guys their whole career. People will want to work with them. They'll absolutely want to work with them. So I'm excited to see what's next for Mark Ingram, and I think he's going to do well. But it seems like Big Noon Kickoff for Fox Sports is where he'll go. So I want to switch gears here and talk about Derek Carr and where he ranks. So Pro Football Focus put him 14th in their ahead of the 2023 season rankings. The quarterbacks listed above him are as followed. You have Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Matthew Stafford, Deshaun Watson. Those are the quarterbacks ranked ahead of Derek Carr. Derek Carr ranked 14th. And I guess like the popular or like the hot take opinion today would me being livid about this list and saying Derek Carr should be ranked higher, but I think 14 is a great spot for him. I really do. And let's start off with the common ground here. Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Herbert, Rodgers, Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence. Those 8 ranked ahead of Derek Carr. Who's going to argue that Derek Carr is better than any of them? Because it wouldn't be me. So you have that class, right, of Kirk Cousins, Tua, Dak, Stafford. I think that's perfect for Derek Carr. Because while I don't think Derek Carr's like top-end production is on the level of Stafford or on the level of Dak, I think Derek Carr, what you love about him is he's always on the field. Those two have struggled to do that the last 2 years. What also he does, same thing with Tua, struggling to be on the field. What he also does is kind of give you that baseline of what you can expect production-wise, which is something Kirk Cousins gives a lot of teams. So he is absolutely in that class, and I think this is actually a good ranking for Derek because, again, this is off of a down year, and in reality, if he plays well next season, we're talking about a guy who can shoot up to 10, maybe 11 in a quarterback ranking. Because like I said, there's not a huge separation between Dak, Tua, Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr. Now, I think out of all of them, I would prefer Stafford if he's healthy, but he's the most injury prone out of all of them right now. So that's why it makes sense for him to be in that class. As for Deshaun Watson, I think it was just a rust thing. I think he'll probably remind people who he is on the field this fall, but the rest of the group makes a lot of sense. And I look for Derek Carr, quarterbacks ranked directly underneath him in these rankings. You have Geno Smith, you have Jared Goff, you have Daniel Jones, you have Justin Fields. I personally would take Derek Carr over all of those. I know that Jared Goff and Geno Smith just had outstanding seasons, and I know that Justin Fields has all the potential in the world. But with Fields, I got to see that potential play out in a full season, which I think it could, and I hope it does. He's an electric player. And then for Goff and Geno, they were great last year. But I know that Derek Carr has been at least consistently good, even in bad situations where Jared Goff was bad, really fun to watch at McVay, then mediocre, then struggled in Detroit, and then bounced back in Detroit. So it's kind of been all over the map. So again, I look at this ranking, Derek Carr, 14th in the NFL. I'm okay with it. I don't think it's a problem at all. I think that's a really nice spot for him. And I think when you look at these rankings, like I mentioned, if Derek Carr does what we think he can do, and I think he can actually end up being a guy that produces at an insanely high level with the weapons the Saints have put around him, then the leeway is there to move up. Like I said, if Dak struggles, if Kirk struggles, if Stafford's not healthy, all of a sudden Derek's sliding into that 10th spot. And you're looking at it differently. But what I can say about this list, and I think it's something that Saints fans, even if you don't like Derek Carr, you should come to the agreement with. The Saints last year rolled Andy Dalton out for 14 games. Derek Carr is better than Andy Dalton any day of the week. And I know there was this discourse about whether or not he's even that much of an upgrade because everyone liked to compare Andy Dalton's so-so season to Derek Carr's worst season and say, oh, what do we got here? But in reality, I looked at this whole list for PFF. Andy Dalton wasn't in their top 32. So the Saints went from a guy that they don't even value in their top 32 to a guy where they have 14th. And again, you don't have to love Derek Carr. I don't even think Derek Carr is elite, obviously. But huge upgrade for this team. And now, because of this type of move, we're thinking about, hey, what is the ceiling? How many games can the Saints win? How much of an impact is Derek going to be for them? How many more wins can he get them? I'd rather have that conversation than what was last year, which was trying out Andy Dalton. He had a couple of nice drives, followed by a couple of bad games. And this team could never, ever, ever get close to 500 football. So yes, whether you love him, whether you hate him, whether you're iffy on him, whether you're cautiously optimistic about him, Derek Carr ranked 14th in the NFL out of all quarterbacks. I think that's a very fair spot for him. That's probably where I would have him about. I mean, maybe on this list, I'd personally have him over Tua, and that's just because I don't know if Tua is going to stay healthy. And honestly, I can say the same thing about Stafford. I think Stafford and Tua's high end is better than Derek's. But are they going to be healthy? And availability is a very big ability. And fortunately for the Saints, Derek does that, and they're going to need that because quarterbacks have been injured an awful lot. So overall, I'm pleased with the PFF ranking. If I had something to say and get it off my chest, I would. And I actually have something to say about the next topic about that in terms of getting something off my chest because I think this is going to be very, very pivotal for the New Orleans Saints. But before we do that, I want to remind you, just like before, this show is brought to you by Ladder and Bloom, and Chris Smith of Ladder and Bloom is one of the top realtors in New Orleans. And for a free marketing valuation of your property, to book a property tour, or to just talk real estate with him, you can give him a call at 504-231-2004. That's Chris Smith of Ladder and Bloom. So I said I had something to get off my chest, and I think I'll just get that off my chest. And it has to do with Trevor Penning. So when the Saints drafted Trevor Penning, I was not one of those people who hated the pick. I thought the pick actually made a lot of sense. They needed an offensive lineman. They got an offensive lineman, especially because Teron Armstead moved on to Miami. They had an opening at left tackle. Penning didn't do much, though. Penning did not do an awful lot for the Saints last year. It started off with an injury, and it ended with an injury. So preseason, not a great first game. Shows a lot of promise his second game. Third game comes out on a heater, and then he gets hurt. Has the foot injury, misses time. Finally comes back at the end of the year. We all of a sudden start thinking about, oh, this is great for him. He'll get reps. He won't be completely new going into his second season. He'll have a little bit of that, I guess, wear and tear in a good way, not the bad wear and tear, although that's what he ended up getting. And he has the Lisfranc injury. So it started with a foot injury, ends with a foot injury. And now we're going into June. And I haven't heard anything bad about Trevor Penning's recovery. I haven't heard that he's got a setback. I haven't heard that he's going to miss extra time than they expected. All I am saying, though, is Trevor Penning has not played an awful lot of games for the Saints. And the Saints spent a nice amount of capital last year's draft to make sure they could have Olave and Trevor Penning. Trevor Penning replaced a Pro Bowl caliber guy in Teron Armstead. And if he's not available, if he's not on the field, we're going to have to start to have a real conversation about whether or not that pick turned out well and how much that'll affect the season. Because I've been pretty optimistic about the Saints this whole offseason. I think the Saints are going to go 10-7, 11-6. I really do. And if they don't, we'll be back here to talk about why I think this coaching staff's got to go, because that's the type of record this team should have. They're constructed pretty well. But this offensive line is banged up right now. Eric McCoy is by himself. Pete's not playing right now. Ruiz is not playing right now. Ramchek's not playing right now. And Trevor Penning is not playing right now. But at least with the others, I've seen Ruiz play a while now. In fact, if we're going to be specific, I've seen Ruiz play 46 games. I've seen McCoy play 57 games. I've seen Will Clapp play 50-something games in his NFL career. Ramchek, Pete, obviously we've seen them play a ton of games. Armstead, before he left, played a ton of games. The Saints historically, I would say they're pretty good at drafting offensive linemen. Now, I don't know what the hit percentage would be. I don't think it's as great because for every one of those guys, there's a Rick Leonard, and that stuff doesn't work out, right? But the Saints in the top 3 rounds, usually money. Like I said, McCoy, even Ruiz, who last year played well. Teron Armstead was a 3rd-round pick. We already know what they got in a guy like Jari Evans. We know what Pete brought to the table. We know what Ramchek, a 1st-round pick, brings to the table. For Trevor Penning, and I hate doing this to the kid, but a lot of what the Saints want to be is probably going to rest on his shoulders, because if they're going to be a team that mauls people in the run game, I think they need Trevor Penning. If they're going to be a team that hits that next ceiling, I think they need Trevor Penning at left tackle to figure out if this kid's good enough to handle it. Because if he's not, that's a very important position the Saints are going to have to figure out. And yes, I know the Saints got James Hurst, and yes, I know James Hurst is probably one of the better number 2 left tackles you could have out there, right? If he's got to start, you're okay with it. Do you love it? Maybe not, but you're not really sweating and game planning on, all right, we got to make sure everything's sliding his way for protection and helping him out. I don't think it's as dire of a concern, but Trevor Penning has that high ceiling, man. He's got the strength and the speed at a size that should not be possible. But if he's not healthy and he's not playing, we're not going to have a clear indication of what he can be. And I know people want to preach patience, and patience is important because Cesar Ruiz was a perfect example of that. First 2 years, nothing. Last year, really impressive. Really, really impressive. But with Trevor Penning at left tackle, I don't think you can afford to be that much more patient. Like, I think this year he's got to step up. And I'll go as far to say this about Trevor Penning. Trevor Penning is in a draft class with Chris Olave and Alontae Taylor, who gave you immediate results. He's in a draft class where the Saints, although they didn't select him, signed Rashid Shaheed as an undrafted guy who gave you immediate results. Trevor Penning, a 19th overall pick, in a draft class that had a couple of starting offensive tackles to begin with, 2 of them being in Seattle. He's got to play. And I know that it's so tough because, like, you can't control injuries, and you also can't blame a player for getting hurt. You really can't. Like, half of the time, especially with Penning's case, it's a fluke thing. But I'd like to see him out there, and I really do mean this. I think the Saints' ceiling as a team is exponentially higher if Trevor Penning's out there than it would be if he's not out there. I really do feel that way. I think that this team changes a little bit if he's not out there. So I want to see what happens with Trevor Penning. I know with mandatory minicamp coming up, we should get a little bit better of an update. I haven't heard anything about him potentially missing training camp. I think he's going to be ready to roll. But, I don't want the Saints to go into next season where James Hurst is the starting left tackle for pretty much all 17 games. I just don't want that. No knock on James Hurst. I just don't think that's the best way and the best route for the Saints being a successful team. You want to protect Derek Carr? You want to build that run game? I think Trevor Penning's the guy to do it, especially the run game aspect, because I know pass blocking early on that can be tough. Trevor Penning should succeed in run blocking because it's all about going downhill and him using that mean streak. And when you got Alvin, when you got Jamal Williams, when you got Kendra Miller, you got Taysom Hill, I want them running the ball as much as they can until the other team proves to stop them. And I think Trevor Penning would do a good thing in that regard. Now, before I wrap it up, guys, if you're listening to the live stream, you want to throw in some comments, some concerns, I can pull them up, and then we'll get you guys going on your way on this Monday morning. But let's see if there's any comments that you guys have to throw in here. If not, no biggie. If you do have something, though, be prediction, concern, question, whatever, throw it in, and I'll get to it. We'll get to this comment here. The 3 concerns I have for this team is the health of the O-line, linebacker room, which is paper thin, and the health of Lattimore and Alante, who showed concern his rookie season. Well, I think those are all valid concerns, right? I think O-line, like we just mentioned, all banged up outside of McCoy. Pete coming off injury. Penning coming off injury. Ruiz coming off injury. Ramczyk played pretty much all last year, but he's always battling through something. So McCoy right now is the only guy that you feel good health-wise. Linebacker room. Absolutely hit the nail on the head. I love the duo of Pete Werner and Demario Davis. I do not love what comes to follow on that depth chart. And I think for them, DeMarco Jackson could take that next step. Maybe Zach Bond could take that next step. But we don't know if they will. And I don't think it's fair to really say that the Saints should be confident in that because I haven't seen it yet. So I do think there's a little bit of concern there. Now, I've heard a couple good things about DeMarco Jackson with what he did in OTAs. So now you hope that mandatory minicamp is a little bit more of that. And then you hope training camp is more of that. And all of a sudden you go, okay, can DeMarco have a Caden Ellis type of leap where, God forbid his number's called, he rises to the occasion. Then that linebacker concern where he's away, but I don't think it's really gone right now. I think it's prominent in terms of the concern scale. So I agree with you there. And as for the health of Lattimore and Alante, I talked about this last week. The secondary, they could be a top 5 unit. They were second in fewest passing yards allowed last year. And what made that so incredible to me was Lattimore missed 10 games. So I agree with you. I think Lattimore, his health is a big thing because if he's out there, I think this is where you talk about the Saints secondary being elite. Not good, elite. Because Lattimore and Alante, you still have Paulson Adebo if he can bounce back. You still have Bradley Roby. You have Tyrann Mathieu, who came on strong at the end of last year. I'd imagine Marcus May is going to be better. I don't think he could be as bad as he was last year. So I expect the second year in Dennis Allen's system to pay dividends for him. He's been at OTAs all the time, so that's good. Jordan Howden, the rookie from Minnesota, he's been better. And he's actually flashed from time to time in OTAs. So I think there's a chance that you get something out of him. And even looking around, I mean, the Saints added Lonnie Johnson Jr. Maybe he gives you a little bit of depth there. I like the secondary a lot. I really do. And I do agree with you. I think Lattimore and Alante, that's where you're going to get the high-end production. But we'll see. I think it might work in different ways, right? Lattimore missed 10 games last year. Maybe he's healthy all of this year. And again, he got hurt on a play where he had to go out of position to try and stop a touchdown pass against Seattle because the secondary was all out of sorts early in the year. And he suffered a lacerated kidney because of it, which I don't even want to imagine how painful that is. The fact that he came back at the end of the season immediately has a pick 6. The guy is like a one-of-one talent when he's on his game. He's so special. But I do agree with you. Those are all very valid concerns. And I think for New Orleans, the linebacker and O-line room is where I'm really concerned at. Although it's Carr's first year on the team, I hope Pete allows for him to have control of the plays at the line of scrimmage. We've been missing that for too long. From everything I've heard, that will happen. I think that Carr's had a lot of control in OTAs. You hear a lot of communication in the front. And I think it's a little different now because the last 2 years, the Saints have really relied on Eric McCoy to be calling out the protections, figuring it out. And I think McCoy will still, at some level, have a say. And you kind of want that, right? You want McCoy to be a savvy center who can handle that. And he has for the last 2 years. But the Saints, to your point, if they're going to operate at their best, it's going to be when a guy like Derek Carr at QB is controlling the line of scrimmage and making sure everything is in place of where it needs to be. And I think that's the best possible thing for them. So I think Derek's going to do that. He will have control. I don't think the Saints make the signing they do without telling Derek, like, we're entrusting a lot of power in you, and we're hoping that you deliver and you make us feel like geniuses at the end of the day. But yeah, I do think he will have a lot of control there. I really hope the Saints bring in a linebacker in the next few weeks as well. I'm fearful of that position being so weak on a poor tackling team. Yeah, look, I mean, the tackling part, those are guys that have to get better at. Early in the season, Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu missed a lot. Tyrann cut it out towards the end. Alante missed a lot, over aggressive. Hopefully that changes. But I think for New Orleans, linebacker is going to be probably the position we sweat out the whole season. And I just don't know if there's a guy out there right now that will change things. And I looked at it before, I believe it was last week, went over linebacker free agents, and I'll pull it up now just for us to go through. But guys who are free agents at the moment at that linebacker position, Zach Cunningham, Deion Jones, Miles Jack, Quan Alexander, John Bostic, guys in that level who are older, right? John Bostic, the oldest of the group at 32, but everyone else, Quan's 28, Miles Jack's 27, Deion Jones 28, Zach Cunningham 28. You would be getting a guy coming off a contract who didn't play particularly well, who is probably out to prove that he's still got a little bit of gas left in the tank. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I want to make that very clear. If the Saints were to sign one of those guys as their number 3 linebacker, that'd be cool with me. I just don't expect any of those guys to come in and play a huge role and immediately make an impact that just goes through the locker room and you hear it. And you feel like if one of those guys goes down to Mario or Pete, they'll take over. Because let's be pretty fair, when Caden came in, we didn't know he was going to do what he did beforehand. So that's why with DeMarco Jackson and Zach Bond, if you continue to hear good things, you hope maybe that's what they can do. Whereas the vets, you kind of know what they are. Like, I don't think signing 32-year-old John Bostic all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's going to hit a renaissance year, or the same thing for Quan Alexander, which you can bring him back, but is he going to have a renaissance year? I don't think so at all. So, like, I think that's where it gets tough. But I do think they'll look at the market, and I think how confident they feel in the young guys behind Pete and DeMario will dictate whether or not they want to do this. But those are kind of the names you're looking at: Deion Jones, Zach Cunningham, Quan Alexander, Miles Jack. Nothing particularly great. Guys that have had good years, don't get me wrong, but they've probably played their best football and it's gone, as opposed to it's yet to come. And I think we'll see. But linebacker for sure, I think that's going to be a topic for the Saints for a while, as will O-line, as will, if we're being honest, the receiver room. And it's not that they're not talented, it's the injury concerns. But that room's probably the one that gets me most excited because there's a lot of talent on there. I remember last year when you're looking at the depth chart, you're like, all right, I guess you could pencil in that guy for 4th, 5th, 6th. This year, you're also penciling guys in, not sharpening them, but it's because of talent. Makes me all the more excited about what this Saints team can do. But again, early June phase here. Still got a lot more work for the Saints to do in terms of becoming that team that I think they can be. But I think a lot of it's going to start with the quarterback. I think a lot of it's going to end with the health. I know that a lot of us have concerns about the coaching staff, and I'm not going to tell anyone to kind of put those coaching staff concerns away, because even when I sit here today, next Monday, the Monday after that, and I preach optimism about this Saints team, in the back of my mind, I'm going to be concerned about this coaching staff, because until you prove that you can do it, I'm going to have my reservations. So, again, we'll see what happens there. But I do think this is a talented squad, and I really hope with mandatory minicamp coming up now, we're getting some positive updates on guys like Trevor Penning, on guys like Cesar Ruiz, because the worst possible thing for New Orleans will be you start this year with a banged-up O-line, because if there's one thing Derek Carr does not want, it's to get hit. And the one thing that Derek Carr struggled with the Raiders was when you start hitting him and you're beating him down, that's when you're going to see him at his worst. When he's clean, he's going to dice you up. When he's at his worst, not great. So you want that O-line healthy. and we'll see if they do that. But it's been a blast as always, guys, talking to you on this Monday morning for the Straight Up Saints podcast. I know it's kind of been a little bit of a dry spell for Saints content. Nothing's really kind of been brewing, which might be a good thing. I think no news for the Saints is usually good news. When it's popping, it's kind of bad news sometimes. Either way, though, whether it's good news, bad news, somewhere in the middle, I'll be here to talk about it on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page, not just for Saints content, great Pelicans content, Tulane content, LSU content, pop culture content. They got it all. So subscribe to the YouTube page. And as always, keep staying tuned to the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation. And we'll be back next Monday with yet another live stream. So make sure you bring your questions, any comments. Probably have some stuff to talk about with mandatory minicamp, and we'll go from there. But that's going to do it for this edition. I thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, everyone.